All right, Alice, Eric, Libby, I think we're going to wait for 1 more minute and then we'll start the workshop. Okay. Before we start, do any of you have any questions that came up during the logic model process? I don't have any of you on mute, so you can feel free to ask away. I'm going to say that we'll get to those questions later then. All right? Okay. So this is the final session in our performance measurement workshop for New Sector Alliance. We're going to cover quite a few different topics, everywhere from reviewing the logic model homework from last week to talk about survey design, collection, and analysis. I know it's a lot, and we have space to ask questions about all of those things and also get a little bit deeper on your particular program questions. So there were a couple of lessons that I think we learned and took away from the logic model process. And I want to go through those, and I am using examples of your logic models to talk about those specific things. This first one is from last year's New Sector Capital Partners example of how to write a goal that makes sense for everyone, because these logic models are first and foremost a communication tool both for internal stakeholders and to go to funders and be able to say, you know, this is the outcome that you're investing in. And many of those funders and many of those stakeholders are not going to know what make clear traction towards a PFS-SIB transaction is going to be. I still am not sure what that is. So we worked to make something a little bit more clear and readable to get at what third sector capital really is doing, which is creating these support for a social impact bond model to end chronic homelessness. So, you know, this is one of your sort of broad goals that that should be understandable for everyone. And here we're actually using San Francisco Education Fund as a great example of the difference between a goal and an objective, which is that the goal often mirrors either a part or the entire organization's mission statement. So, you can actually imagine that the San Francisco Education Fund's mission statement is to, kind of create a cadre of students who graduate ready for college and careers. And then the specific objective is, is really about the number and embeds the sort of strategy, how you're gonna get there within the objective. When you talk about the number of students who are earning their post-secondary credential by a certain time period. And then the objectives really are actually the most challenging part for me to write often. But Transaxis did a really great job of articulating that. The broad goal would be more like a mission statement: offer people with disabilities the opportunity to work in a competitive job market. And then the objective is this sort of specific recruitment strategy of a number of associates by a certain time. Their strategy is a combination of marketing and then partnerships. And the indicator is in some ways a reflection of this objective, because the objective is what a successful outcome would be. So the outcome is 60 people with disabilities would be recruited for these jobs, and the objective mirrors that. Now for GLOW, which is a program that is specifically about financial literacy and financial responsibility for low-income students, articulating those strategies in the third column for your logic model is really about describing the activities and then being really aware of this as the point in which you're talking about what your project does. So the GLOW example includes these kind of modules and outreach, and I made that more specific because modules didn't make sense to me as an outside reader, and partner outreach could be more specific. So going from strategies about modules and outreach to expand financial literacy and college financial planning across California sites through the specific partner outreach, and then financial literacy lessons, and have those lessons split out so they're easily readable. So, the sort of fifth lesson is that the logic models are designed for. Is that Dion? Hello, Dion. Logic models are really designed to help you articulate your assumptions, what success looks like, and then guide performance measurement. So in order to be able to measure change, you have to articulate it through a logic model, and you have to make that change measurable. So for the San Francisco Education Fund, one of the outcomes is almost goal-like or broad in increasing community engagement with an awareness of issues in public education. This is a great and meaty goal, but it's too difficult to measure, and it's also two outcomes in some ways. The idea of community engagement, or a community's commitment to public education, and then awareness of the issues in public education. So I broke that out for the idea of having more volunteers sustaining programs in focal schools. So instead of a broader community talk about how volunteers are making this commitment to the specific schools that are part of the intervention. And then for kind of awareness, the idea of, again, focusing on volunteers, people who are making this commitment, but moving them, their sort of awareness of or understanding of public education issues from I like to volunteer to, I understand the issues that are facing Latino, African American, Filipino, and other target student populations with regard to obstacles to college. So, you want to either focus on the change that happens because of the intervention and maybe some key process measures. That would be, increasing the number of volunteers in a school. But you don't have to measure the number of materials that were produced or the number of meetings that were created in order to make these outcomes happen. Those are all put in the strategies. It's really not important for you to include everything that you're going to be doing as a resident within the logic model, but just use it as the broad overview. So, very often the easiest thing to measure is the work you do to prepare staff for the capacity change, but what really matters to measure is the capacity change. Does that make sense? Okay. Thanks, Eric. Thank you. Thanks, Libby. So I'm going to unmute everyone and see if you have any questions, and we can go back to the slides. I know that for some of you, I used your program as an example, and I'd love to hear if those suggestions made sense for you. Okay, unmuting. Okay. Can everyone talk?
I have a question about, this is Libby talking. For my team, one of the big things we're struggling with is where we are being asked to track all those small inputs and outputs. And so if they don't fit into our logic model, sort of how do they fit into the bigger picture of tying the small sort of day-to-day work we do to our larger impact? Where is that link, that connection kind of localized or expressed if it's not in the logic model?
So are the things that you're collecting indicators of good teaching? I think you're working at the BPE, so it's about how to understand teaching as it's connected to successful performance of students. Is that true?
Yeah, we're more focused on the use of data in schools, so it's really like the outcomes that we're looking at are how literate are schools, like over the course of the year. Do they become more familiar with using data? Do they use it more often? Do they understand how to use Excel or how to access their own data, and sort of what kind of they look like as a data culture? So that's sort of the main outcomes we're looking at.
Yeah. So it's a pretty meta project, right? Because you're using data to look at how data is used, and so there can be some confusion about what data teachers and administrators should be using to improve their management of learning outcomes, and then what data you should be collecting. And it sounds like what data you should be collecting is if they're using data, so if they're accessing the data that is available to them, and if they're actually making behavior change because of that. And that might be something that you do a kind of mixed method. So you're counting access to that data, or you're counting the number of times that they use and analyze that data, and then you're doing some qualitative data around, do principals say that they have made changes in the curriculum because of the data that's available to them? Does that make sense to you and resonate with the program?
Yeah, it definitely resonates. I guess my question is in terms of our inputs and outputs, so sort of the meetings that we have, the Excel trainings we have, the products we produce that lead to teachers instructing differently, etc. we're being asked to track those, and to me they seem related to our outcomes in regards to data culture and our impact in regards to student achievement. And I was curious, so for those very fine-grained, not as important inputs and outputs, do they fit at all with the sort of, like, where do they come into this impact measurement thing?
Yeah, I think that they do, because you're teaching, right? So thinking about those as being, basically the strategies include a certain number of trainings, and the outcomes of those are not necessarily that you did the trainings, but the number of teachers who now have proficiency with Excel. Farron, does that make sense? I know that Farron and I actually talk an enormous amount about this particular issue with regard to trainings, because trainings are incredibly important when you think about saving people's lives through increasing sort of hygienic behaviors, right? So so it's important for nurses to have these trainings happen, but the end outcome is not that trainings happened, it's that people are washing their hands. So trying to find a balance there is important. I would say splitting that up between the strategies, recognizing that you're doing an incredible amount of investment in these trainings, but have the short-term outcome be that people took the training, the middle-term outcome that they're actually using their Excel skills.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Oh, Alice, so Alice's question is wondering how long you have access to these tools. It will continue. You're going to be able to have access to your logic model until the end of your resident experience. Thanks, Alice. Okay, so now we're getting into the what you do with your logic model once you have it. It's really, the logic model is great for communication and also to help make the connection between the data you already collect and the data you want to collect. So identifying the gaps in the data that you have so that you can make affordable and practical decisions about what data you collect. And that really starts with kind of creating an evaluation plan. The logic model is the first step to that. Also thinking about, and you may have already done this, reading through the literature, recognizing what data is out there and what what other programs that are doing the work that you do, so that you can clarify the assumptions that you've already made. And also gather proxy data. So for some of us, either because we have a really small program or a small budget, proxy data is going to be the closest that we have to really getting some solid information on how the intervention affects the population. And I use throughout this slide GLOW as the example. So the idea that financial literacy training actually improves credit scores, and doing some initial research to be able to say, okay, there is another program, it's not in this state, but it has shown that financial literacy training improves credit scores. And then for methodology, there's the idea of sample size, and this often really it sort of freezes people. They say, oh dear God, we can't have a randomized control group for our survey, so there's no possible way that we're going to be able to do an evaluation. Or the intervention has already started, so we don't even have the pre-test baseline to do that. And what I'm going to say to you is that that's fine, but it's not the only, and sometimes it's not the best way to do the research that you need to do, because sometimes a randomized control group is not really useful to your stakeholders. And sometimes, surveying the entire population is not feasible, but it also, it is not really helpful. For research design at True Impact, we always use multiple criteria from different sources. A mixed method is just the way that things usually work in the real world. And I think with your programs, that makes a lot of sense. So with the GLOW example, the idea of potentially doing surveys or interviews to get at the idea of these trainings improving people, enticing students to use budgets. So either the students, or if it's a classroom-based training and they're using budgets in school, then teachers reporting that they are using budgets for financial planning. For the review of records, many organizations, it sounds like BPE does a lot of this. They collect an enormous amount of data right now, so you might not do any primary data collection yourself. For GLOW, it would be, the schools might actually be collecting credit scores or collecting the number of students who apply for FAFSA. So the program, if the program's goal is to increase the number of students who are applying for financial aid, this review of records would get you that data. And then the idea of control groups. There are lots of ways that you can, if you don't have a pre and post test, or you can't get a randomized control group, that you can still use a comparison group. In the case of GLOW, of those 8,000 students who are receiving financial literacy training in California, there are going to be classrooms next door that don't receive those trainings. And you can use those as basically a natural comparison group to test credit scores if those students are, pretty much matched in income, ethnicity, family background. And, then you can actually just use proxy data or state data to get the credit scores of other low-income youth in California and use those as a comparison group if you can't get those records from the school for those who didn't receive the trainings. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay. And then part of the evaluation plan is to present it to stakeholders. Sometimes the data that we collect and the data that we think is important misses something. And so thinking about how this data is going to be used is really important, particularly if those stakeholders are funders, or if they're going to be the people who are implementing the program itself. So the idea of what to collect to prove the program, I think, also trips folks up, and many of us think that there's only one kind of data collection to have, but for each kind of research method, there are many kinds of data out there. For quantitative data, we talked about records, and we talked about surveys. It's really easy to send out a web survey, and organizational records often have an enormous amount of data and research that you can use to get at the outcomes that you're looking at. For qualitative, these teacher interviews and participant interviews and essays, again, can happen over the web, which is super cheap and easy, or you can be doing in-person interviews or sample focus groups. For proxy data, we talked about this in the last workshop as well. This is really a fantastic way to create matched comparison groups or compare means between your small group and either a state or national group. One of the examples that I often use is a research study done by Brandeis University on robotics education. And what they did was they sent out a survey to a group of college students who had participated in robotics programs in high school. And they matched them with other students of the same ethnicity, income, background, and whether they participated in AP and honors level science and math. And so, you know, by doing that, by creating this match group out of basically just a national data set, because there are these enormous, wonderful data sets that, that are publicly available, they could say controlling for, interest in math and science and aptitude in math and science. People who participate in robotics programs are 7 times more likely to major in engineering. And that's an incredibly powerful way to have a comparison group without having to actually have, a randomized control sample. So, analysis, I talked about comparing means, statistical analysis. There are lots of great and, again, free open source statistics packages out there. And then there's just a matter of taking the data that you have, whether that be records or these kind of like monitoring and reporting from BPE, and starting to analyze those trends and patterns. So you want to be looking for change over time, thinking about what kind of themes are coming out. And if you're doing any paper essays or or exams, trying to think about how you can really practically examine change with the program. And I know that statistical analysis seems scary, but it's super fun, and you don't necessarily have to take my word for it. But the genius of the internet is that there are these tutorials out there, and the tools are available for you to do that. So that's what I have for us today. If you have specific questions, I'd again love to go over them, not just for your logic models, but for kind of the whole ball of yarn that is data collection. Okay. So I will send out a feedback form for all of the workshops in a few minutes and send out these slides as well. But if you have any questions, you can just email me at smiller@trueimpact.com. And we've had New Sector partners send us their logic models and ask for questions, or sort of just ask specific questions about their particular survey, or what to do with this 5-point Likert scale survey that a consultant sent to them now that they have to implement it. And we're happy to answer any of those questions. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and good luck. And again, stay in touch. Oh, thank you, Alice. All right. Take care. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Eric.
The organ